Right. Okay.
Tom, do you want to try? Do you want to try and listen at least to the meeting? Okay. I will put you on the thing, and if you want to interject, then the phone's sort of next to me. But if it doesn't work, just let me know, and we'll ring off. Okay.
Okay, all. Welcome to the Inshore Fisheries Conservation Authority meeting on the 24th of January at 1 o'clock. I've got apologies from David Milligan from the MMO, Robert Francis, as is away, and Harry Legg. And Kate is on the phone live due to weather, so hopefully she'll hear the meeting and have some input if possible. Okay, right, so we'll move on to agenda item 1, declarations of interest.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Could I declare an interest, a non-registrable interest as a hobby fisherman?
Yep, hello, try again. Hello, Chairman. Declare an interest as a commercial fisherman.
No problem. Thank you for that. Agenda item 2, minutes of the last meeting. Have you all had a chance to read them? And are you happy they're a correct record?
I've got 2 points from Kate Sugar. I'm just trying to find them. Kate, can you help me out? What are the things you wanted to change? Sorry, I found your email here.
Just one, actually.
Go on then.
So it's just a comment. Hang on a minute, where are we? My comment, so page 7 says at the top, just underline, it says Mrs. K. Sugar said their house. And I just had some wording amendment to that. So Mrs. K. Sugar said there had been, but it was limited. Further evidence supporting designation of stork jellyfish and giant goby was provided by the Natural England Evidence Team visit to the islands in July. But I've emailed that in, so hopefully that can just be, right. It's just a slight amendment.
Okay, so how do I've got the amendment here.
Yeah.
So do I do anything with that?
We can just have that amended with Andy later after the meeting.
Right.
Any other amendments or comments? The proposer, there a correct record then, please? Yeah. A seconder? Yeah. Those in favour? Thank you very much. Okay. Urgent items. Haven't got any. The only thing I will say on the agenda is the MMO comes under Natural England on agenda item 11. So it's not a second Natural England, it's an MMO. But as David is not here and we can't contact him, I'm going to put agenda item 11 into part 2 for information. But if you've got any questions on it, you can come to me at a later date and I will get the answers from David for you. Okay? As Kate's still on the phone live, we will ask her some questions on the report, if that's okay with Kate, as long as she remains on the line. Okay? So if everyone's happy with that, we'll move on to parts requiring decision. Agenda item 4, the monitoring update, and I'll hand you over to Tom, our Chief Fisheries Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So from this report, this is principally talking about future research. As I note in point 2, we have no ongoing research. However, we have ambition, and as I've talked about over the last few meetings, we want to encourage greater participation from universities and academic research to help us with the knowledge that we need to gather. And I think this is beginning to come to fruition. Rick and I have been working hard, visiting universities and encouraging this sort of research, which I think will be a good thing for us. So the information is there in front of you. I think there is a range of research. Generally, there is work going on with MSc students who will be looking at some fisheries research, and this will happen in March. The key thing I want to talk about, and I refer to this a little bit in our annual plan, it's going to be the biggest piece of work I think we will have this year, which is the surveys which we will be undertaking. And if you look on page 6 of this report, there's a map which shows you the area to the east of the islands where we want to do the research. As you know, the bylaw is being reviewed and updated, and in order to do that, we need to know a lot more about what is happening in that area. So it's the area of soft sediment that you know well. It's down to about 80 to 90 metres. And that will really help us to understand what is down there, what state the habitat is, and whether or not it's going to be sensitive or whether it's proportionate to allow additional mobile gear to fish there. The other key bit of information is I'm taking a belt and braces approach to the survey. We don't have the luxury of having our own research funds, which we can allocate to one organisation, say, do the work for us. So Cornwall IFCA in the Tiger Lily have very generously said they will come at a very low cost, i.e. we basically pay just the fuel and the days of the people involved. And that's going to happen in March. It will be just the swathe sonar, so the acoustic survey, which will happen over about 5 days. I've also submitted an application for a bigger piece of research with Plymouth University, which is likely to happen in July. And that's the, in Annex 1, that's the project which I've attached there. It's a much bigger piece of work, which hopefully Natural England have also agreed to put some money in for us. But there's no guarantee that will happen because we might not get the money from EMFF, but we will hopefully find out in March if we have got that money. And that will provide us, both of those bits of work will provide us with all the data, all the information we need to make decisions on the bylaw review. Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions for Tom? Steve?
Thank you, Chairman. Question for Tom on the buffer zone mentioned at the bottom of the first part of Annex 1. The buffer zone, is it still, and I've forgotten what the length is it 3 or 4 times the length of the towing warp? It used to be, there used to be a specific distance on a buffer zone.
Well, just point me to the page again where you took.
Yeah, it's the bottom of your Annex 1, first page, the buffer zone.
Correct. So there's, I can't remember the exact figures, but it's something like 3 or 4 times the warp length. So in other words, the buffer zone would be quite small. So that's, I think it's a minimum distance. So we might want to be a bit more proportionate or precautionary and increase the size of the buffer zone. But I hope that this is the sort of data will give us a real insight into what we think is the right thing to do regarding the buffer zone.
Yeah, I quite agree. I mean, I agree, Chairman, that buffer zones are essential because the way that big trawlers work, they're usually miles, well, not miles, but several distance away from the actual vessel itself. The vessel might be right on the 6-mile limit, but one set of gear could be well inside. So, yeah, I agree with that. The second question is on the top of the next page, and on the, you stated that no surveys have been undertaken in that area of deep circulittoral sand. In actual fact, there was one about 10 years ago by a wave energy company. And I've got all the details on that. Didn't bring it with me, but I think I've still got it at home.
That would be really useful to have. The more that we can gather together, the better the picture we'll get. So
it was photographic as well as, I mean, they dropped stuff down and dredged it up and took.
And looking on this map, Steve, on page 6, do you know roughly where that survey was undertaken?
It was about 4.5 miles southeast of Peninis. So it was inside the 6, but outside 4.
Yeah, it's probably around there, isn't it? So just
in other words, round about there.
Yeah, that's one. Okay.
Yeah, I can give you that.
Thank you for that information, Steve, and I'm sure Tom will look forward to taking it on.
Absolutely. The more we can get, the better, and I think that will all. So the rough timescale is that we will have data, a fully complete report. I would imagine by this time next year. So there is time involved, I'm afraid, in getting all this collated, but I think it will be worth it.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Thank you for your report, Tom. Okay. Agenda item 5. I would like to welcome Rick, our new Enforcement and Scientific Officer. It's his first meeting. and I'll hand you over to him for his report on operational update. Ricky.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to just bring out some main points. As we all know, the Matt Lethbridge was sold for 17,250. The new build was awarded to a firm in Yeovil called Ribcraft, and completion of the boat is expected in May. We've also moved out of this office move. All our equipment is currently stored in a container, which isn't the best solution at the moment, so we would be looking for somewhere as a permanent storage area. Another thing I'd like to bring up is in training. Both Tom and myself will be doing the Warrant Officers 5-day course in Torquay, and I myself will also be doing a 5 days, 2.5-day radar and 2.5-day chart plotter course in April, which actually comes under the Workboat Code, which is mandatory in April this year for all boat drivers, so one of us has to do it, and it will be me. I don't have a lot more to add on this paper, so unless there are any questions.
Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just I think a reminder, actually, that I think built into the sort of IFCA constitution or ours is that the warrant officer training is refreshed every 3 years. Because I know Doug went twice.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, it's a brilliant course, absolutely superb. Well, I mean, I did it, 15 years ago, and I still remember it distinctly. But I think it is built into our constitution. It should be refreshed every 3 years.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions for Rick? Tom?
Ricky made the point, but I would just want to really emphasise this issue about our storage. We cannot operate out of that school site. It basically means unscrewing the door every time we need to get in there. So I think in discussions you have, in ideas you can bring to us, we need, we need storage, and it's a long-term issue. I know it has been forever, but to have a place where we can properly store equipment is essential for us.
Okay, we can have a Tim.
Have we talked to the Duchy about this?
Only in as much as I asked whether a container could go onto the harbour, into the harbour, and the answer was no. I asked Dale. He suggested whether we could put the container on the Reckitt slip. It's better than where it is, but it's quite congested, and we probably need to move it during things
That would be planning other things.
So,
What about Portlow?
Portflow?
Potentially. Yeah, potentially, Chairman, but it's a long way for, our equipment's fairly close to the harbour where the boat's going to be. So the closer to where the boat is where we need the equipment, ideally.
I think the committee would just get our thinking heads on and see where we can go. But at the moment, we have got a container that will do for the time being, but obviously we need to look at it to upgrade.
I just wonder, Mr. Chairman, do you think there'd be any room down the dump in the row of garages?
Maybe some liaising with the new infrastructure manager. It's something I think we'll have to look into, won't we? I mean, it's not a decision for this committee now, but yeah. All right, I think we're all aware of that now.
Yeah, just one other question, very, very simple. The Association of IFCA's review, the bullet point on page 3. Yeah. Chairs and chief officers are invited to participate in a telephone interview. Any idea when that might take place?
I've done my telephone interview or online one.
Yeah, I think I sent an email. I think the time might have gone. I will check for you. I would have sent an email in early December on this. Have you not taken the opportunity to dig into?
Yeah, I did a questionnaire, completed a questionnaire, but it wasn't actually a telephone interview.
No, the telephone interview was only for chairs.
Yeah.
Or chief officers. It could be delegated. So Tom did the telephone interview and I did the online one.
Yeah, fine.
So we have ticked the boxes on that, which is, I'm glad you brought it up, that's fine. Any other questions for Ricky? No? Okay, so we shall move on to agenda item 6, compliance and enforcement. I'll hand you over to Rick again.
I'm going to be doing bits of this, and Tom is going to do fishing gear permit bylaw. Quick one on the page 3 of 6, the hobby fishing bylaw. Again, still work in progress. Would the committee be happier with recreational fishing bylaw as a name rather than hobby fishing?
Yeah, are you asking for that to become a decision? Because if you are, we'll, yeah.
Yes, I would like it.
Right, can we have a proposer for that then, please? Proposed, seconded, those in favour? Correct, so that's the go-ahead for that.
We printed notices up and they've been sent to all the off-islands, either for distribution to the recreational fishermen, and they were delivered by mail to all the people on St Agnes. So the message is getting out there. Some people are contacting me and giving me their emails, but it's very slow at the moment, okay? But there are people out there who are asking questions and getting involved.
Okay.
I think prosecutions, I think we're all aware of the prosecutions that happened.
Yeah.
Good result for us, thankfully. I have no further comments. I'm going to hand over, unless you've got any questions on what I've just...
Rick, we got quite a few people, and I expect the same applies to the other islands, that do a bit of hobby fishing, but they're only here part year. So I think we might have to, like, maybe it's a job for me to go and, I know who they are, to go and sort of catch them when they're there and give them the paper. So maybe you'll get a little bit more responses.
Okay, that'd be good. Yeah, thank you.
All right, I'll hand you over to Tom then to take over the bylaw.
So on the fishing gear permit bylaw, I've mentioned it in respect to the surveys, which are the critical part to it. So on page 6, you will see a little Gantt chart of the time required for us to do all of this. So here we are in Q1 of 2019, and we are at the kind of informal stage of just discussing it. So the implication of this is it's going to take some time to do it and do it properly, which we want to do, obviously. There's an opportunity for us to develop iteratively. I'm sure Steve will remember the last one took, I think, 14 or 15. It does take time to get it right, doesn't it? But I think obviously the key activity for us this year is around the scientific survey. And I detail, I won't go through each of them now, but each of these stages, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, takes us through to next year, to the end of next year, 2020. In the meantime, and I'm in discussion with some members around this, there is pressure for people to fish in the area. We need to be consistent and robust in our responses, and I've asked for some legal advice on this. I think that the main take-home message really is for us to manage with the bylaw that we've got, ensure that people are able to engage with us. So if there's things about the new bylaw, obviously every time there's a bylaw, it improves. So it's not saying that we're unhappy with the current bylaw, but we need to understand where it's good and where it's not so good, and try and build those strengths into the new bylaw when we do it next year. So the point at which we think about what do we do and how do we do it is not for now, it's for next year. But obviously we can think about those in the time available.
Are you still there, Kate?
I am.
Have you got any questions on that for Tom before I move on?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, lovely. Steve?
Well, just a very brief comment. It did make me smile when I looked at the Gantt diagram here. During the transition period, when we moved from a Sea Fishery Committee to an IFCA, I went to several meetings in London, which we were reassured time after time by DEFRA that the new systems within the new IFCA would make bylaw making very simple. But it still takes 2 years, just as it did in the old Sea Fishery days. Just a comment, Chairman.
That's fine. Okay. No other questions? Agenda item 7, conservation and protected area assessment update. I'll hand you over to Tom.
On this, it's a very short report, and
Yeah.
there's nothing I'm planning to highlight to members on this one.
Are there any questions for Tom on this one? Take it as read. Yeah? Yeah, okay. Okay then, so we shall move on to fees and charges, agenda item 8. Before I hand you over to Rick, I think you've all had a chance to see the new proposed fee. I hope there's going to be some discussion on it, and I won't say no more on it. I'll hand you over there to Ricky.
As you can see, a lot of our charges have been removed completely because of this. We're not towing scientific equipment, so they're no longer relative. Myself and Tom have looked at our fees for a day charge for the patrol vessel. This was a Lethbridge. We are getting a new vessel, probably slightly bigger engine. Well, it has got bigger engines, probably going to be more expensive to run. However, we think a fee when you're paying VAT of just under £1,000 a day is somewhat excessive. We've had a stab at what we think is reasonable, but we probably undercharged. We don't know. So without VAT, we'd be looking at around £300 a day. Obviously, it's open for discussion. If you think it should be more, you think it should be less, open to committee.
Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got misgivings about the size of the reduction in this particular item. And I wondered has the local economic scenario been taken into effect? In other words, have you assessed what the impact may be on other operators? Because the worst thing we can do is to undercut them dramatically and therefore drive them, well, not out of business, but make their business less viable.
Mr. Chair, sorry, could I ask really a series of questions or perhaps a bit more clarification? Are we budgeting to make money out of this boat? Are we targeting any market for this? And then the other one, presumably, when you say charter the boat per day, are the officer's wage, is the officer's wage on top of that, or the charge for the officer? Do we charter the boat without the officer? So various questions there, really. I know, but is that on top of the charge of the boat, or is £300 just for the boat? And if you go with the boat, there's another £37.50 an hour on top of 300.
Right. So the first part of your question is around so all IFCAs were encouraged in the 2014 review to look at alternative sources of income, which is where I think all IFCAs began to look at the options for charging for their services. So we think we should be part of that. So we're not looking at any particular market, nor are we looking for this to be we're not looking for a profit-making venture. All this is aimed to do is diversify our income. Yeah. And I think, I think I've said in previous reports, in my first annual report, we don't want to be taking on, and we never would take on so much work that we don't fulfill our statutory duty. So I would never imagine that we would do more than, off the top of my head, 10 days worth of this external work. That's the first part of the question. And this is the second part of the question.
I think the second part of the question would depend on who was doing the hiring. If we were doing a project in conjunction that benefited the Isles of Scilly with the university, then we probably wouldn't charge for the officers' hours because we would be learning from it. Yeah. However, if it was a profit organisation, say, I don't know, South West Water said, can you drive us out to the sewerage outlet? Can we have a look at that? Then yes, we would probably charge for our officers' time.
And can I take it that we wouldn't just let anybody take the boat without the officer?
No, it would go with officer only. That's yeah. Tim.
Yeah, I'd kind of reiterate Steve's about the charges as well, but also as someone that has a boat, I know that if I was sort of young and very keen, that there was no way that £300 plus VAT a day would actually stack up. So I think it's a little bit light.
Fair comment. Open for suggestions. Local people I have spoken to, certainly 12-boat passenger boats, when we've chartered them, have been around the £500 mark for a day. And you'd be looking at 8 to 9 hours, capped at 9 hours for a day's hire.
I mean, the percentage on the past here is a 70% reduction, isn't it? That's the percentage we're looking at the moment?
Yeah, it's a figure.
So,
Mr. Chair, I mean, may I suggest we sort of write some leeway into this, sort of perhaps minimum proposed fee, maximum proposed fee, because as Ricky said, depending on who's doing the chartering, if it's a university, somebody we want to encourage, then we can bring it down. If it's, I don't know, a dozen tourists, then we put it up because we don't want to be competing with tourist boats. So can I suggest, perhaps 300 to 500 proposed fee?
as long as we can legally do that, that's my...
Where would there be a law saying, I mean, we presumably have that autonomy to set the fee that we, and and I think if there is that flexibility in this, I don't see any reason. I obviously can double check with authorities in the council.
Would you be happy to go with a £500 a day with officer flexible? Maybe we could, if we worded it, would that be suffice? Or?
I would have thought so, because, say, for argument's sake, a university wanted it for a week. Right. You could go to 300, 2,000 pounds for the week. We're still making a bit out of it, and we're helping a university. So yeah, depending on.
Tim.
I do agree. It depends who's getting the research. I mean, obviously, we've got to have a load of leeway in this, because if it's really going to reduce our costs of doing surveys and research and that, maybe we should do it almost for nothing. But on the other hand, if we're only getting a little tiny slither out of it, to each case on its merits a little bit. We need to. I know it's a little bit difficult, but
I think we've got to set a standard charge for people, and we have the leeway if we're going to benefit, i.e., as a community, as an IFCA, or as the council for projects. So I think, are we happy to recommend a?
Yes, I think, Mr. Chairman. I mean, if we think it's a bit light, say 500 for argument's sake, and then, because I mean, this is open to the public, isn't it? So any 12-boat operator who looks at it thinks, well, we're not trying to undercut them, but we can be flexible with any market that doesn't impact on other people, i.e., research.
You're happy to propose that?
Yes.
A seconder for that then? Those in favour? Unanimous. So that's the figure. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's right. So the next one now is agenda item 9, the annual plan, and I'll hand you over to Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like, if possible, to spend a bit of time on this, and I've taken some time in the report, and I'll approach this in sort of 2 or 3 chunks, if you don't mind. In point 2, I presented a draft budget for next year. From our point of view, starts in April. There's not much wiggle room, and I think that has always been the case. You're very familiar with our budget. So in points 4 to 8, I also highlight that there are discussions going on at a national level about future funding for all IFCAs, and that's obviously key to what central funding we get. We are in a unique position in that we have many of the same responsibilities as all the IFCAs, but nowhere near enough money to deliver on that research and enforcement that we need. Therefore, what we always need to do is look for partnerships. We need to look for external funding to do that, which is fine, we can do that. But it always means that there is an additional risk for us. And particularly, I make the point later, when we do things like prosecutions, we run a very particular risk. And I don't think that is fair or proportionate on us. So I think in discussions that the chairman is having and I'm having, and if you have, it's very important to to get across this issue that this budget is not sufficient for us to do the work that we need to do, but we make it go an awful long way. And as I'll come on to, we use little bits of money to bring in other additional external funding so we can do as much as we possibly can do. On the next, and this is where perhaps I'll pause after this one, the annual plan, I'm proposing that I'm going to cut and make it slightly reduced in terms of what we're presenting and make it easier for all of us to basically say, this is what we plan to do in 2019-2020, and then to look at that at the end of the year and say, and really assess how successful we've been in that achievement. So it needs to be, as they always say, it needs to be smart, realistic in terms of what we can do. So on the following page, there are, well, on the first page and the following page, there's the bullet points. Just to highlight a few, and this is largely what I'm proposing that we do for next year, and I'm very keen to hear the feedback that you've got. Obviously, the commissioning and the delivery of the new boat is going to be important for us in this the next financial year, and clearly, as I've highlighted before, the survey that we're going to do on the area, I've said to the west of St Mary's, and I keep saying to the west of St Mary's, and I do mean the east of St Mary's, and you know that I do. So that's such a critical piece of work that we've got, and it's going to take quite a lot of our time and quite a lot of our effort, as well as the additional bits of research which we have planned with Exeter University and Plymouth University. We have submitted some EMFF projects. You never know. Obviously, it's the last possible year that EMFF will run before we go into whatever future may hold. That is around the survey. We want to start doing more regular catch monitoring, long-term catch monitoring, and we want to start doing a little bit of work on using natural capital and understanding what natural capital means in the marine environment. So none of those projects we will know if they have been successful until around April, but I think they all bring significant external money. Before I go, I mean, as you see, I want to have a conversation about our reserves and the finances, but could I just pause there, Mr. Chairman, and just get feedback on our annual plan?
Have we got questions from members? Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back a little bit further, paragraph 2, just 2 items on there. The life raft hire, £550. I believe it's cheaper to hire it than it is to buy them outright and have them and then pay for maintenance.
Ricky, can you answer that?
Yeah, we are hiring the life raft. We don't buy it. That is a higher charge per year.
Yeah, value for money. The second thing, just below it, is a £12,000 association subscription. And I'm sure members realise that we actually get, well, within the new burdens funding, there's £13,000 set aside for that. So, or actually nominated for a national organisation. So, in actual fact, that's under the amount that's actually built into the new burdens funding. And then moving on a bit further.
Can I just on that yeah. We pay the additional £1,000 is for a scientific subscription. Yeah. Which I've cancelled because we don't use it, and I don't think it's value for money.
It's worth sharing that we can share with our RIFCAs without paying that £1,000 at the last association meeting. So we can still receive that information without paying the £1,000 at the moment. I
quite agree, Chairman. I think membership of the association is incredibly good value and well worth every penny of 12,000, even though it's an annual fee. Second one is the first bullet point on 9. We will organise a small naming ceremony for the new vessel. Any news on the name yet?
Where we are at the moment, Tom's put it on me to name the new boat for whatever reason. If that's protocol, I don't know. We've liaised with the school to involve the kids. A bit of academia going on there, which I think is great, for suggested ideas, not for the children to name the boat. It's an exercise to introduce the youngsters are silly about what the IFCA is, what it does, its marine conservation work, its enforcement, what it does basically. So it's a bit educational, but on top of that, they can hopefully throw some ideas in. I'm taking advice on naming the boat. So
yes, I was about to say
there is no name at the present time, but it will be named.
So we're not hidebound to call it Boaty McBoatface. No. And the other point I made, I think I may have mentioned it too. I did come up with the idea, certainly at the association annual meeting, of Boy Matt.
Yes.
For the
There are lots, alert, vigilant. There's a lot of nice names out there, but I won't pick it solely myself. I will take advice on it. And also, like I say, involving the kids, I think is great to involve them. But Tom will specify to them that they will not be naming the boat. It's not a competition. It's for them. They might have no idea. They might have some great ideas, but it's a good way forward. So I hope that answers that question. Nick.
Mr. Chair, under research projects, one, the mapping the fishing activity, and then we talk about a small number of students aboard fishing vessels for 3 to 4 weeks. I don't know if Tom realises quite how suspicious fishermen can be. I would have thought it's probably a good idea for you to come to talk to us at some stage, just to say what your long-term plans are for this mapping of fishing activity and so on. If you expect cooperation from fishermen, you've got to get them on your side a bit. I don't think you'll have any problems, but I think if this goes out in the public domain, we ought to be talking to the fishermen.
Work on that. I know we are speaking to them on an individual basis.
Yeah, okay. And then the other thing that occurs to me possibly, obviously the fishermen are doing this voluntarily, and that's fine, but could we sort of build in a value to that in some way towards grants? I'm not sure how these things work, as a sort of our part of sort of EMF funding or anything like that, a match, value in kind or whatever, so I could say, right, you come and move for the day, I'll charge you £200. I don't charge it, but that's contribution towards EMF funding or whatever.
Could Tom look into that?
I can look into it. I mean, anything like that where you can generate some additional funds, I'm very open to. I mean, the EMFF, it's very small. It's a £5,000 project which we put in. That the benefit to us is we get we've put in for new equipment, so new life jackets and things like that. But one of the, so for example, we've looked at getting the new gauges, the metal gauges, because obviously they will have to change because of the core fish increase. But I will definitely look into that. And if there's, I think that within the criteria of EMFF, I think the idea of paying a student to go on a boat probably won't wash, but yeah, I know. Sorry, that's what I meant.
And actually, so the other thing on students aboard boats is public liability.
Again, we're working with. Ricky is working with human resources here. We've got lots of precedents because of the work that happened in 2014, 2016 when Steve was here. So all of the documentation, we're actually quite ahead in that respect, but and funnily enough, MCA have just produced a new guidance note on public liability and people on board vessels. In fact, that was predominantly aimed at media crews, camera crews on board vessels, which I think because they keep wanting to do more, fishing Channel 4 shows. So I imagine that's come about as a result of that.
Tim.
I kind of echo what Nick said in the fact that when I've, in the past, I know it's dive charters, but when I've had people sort of on my vessel to do some sort of research, and we've had that in the past, it throws up two issues. First of all, some of these people aren't very boat savvy, and especially on fishing boats, there isn't a lot of room, and you've got to know when to duck, so to speak, and that they may not always know that. And I think there's a little bit of a concern out there with who is liable when someone gets their foot tangled in something. And the other thing is that it would probably be good to sort of make sure that the students go into this with their eyes open, because no fisherman's going to go home when, let's just say, they're slightly unwell after a while.
Yeah, I think they're all valid points that Tom's taken on board there. Ricky?
Yeah, I think one of the things we were going to do is I, Tom and myself would actually accompany, with the fisherman's permission, accompany the student for a couple of days initially to actually give them stand here, don't stand there, get out of the way, sort of information so that we can keep hold of them and watch what goes on and give them a good safety briefing before they're allowed out on their own, as it were.
I think the fishermen just didn't want it on them totally. That's which is fair.
I think that's...
To be honest, Mr. Chair, the last lot were very good, and they were all young, agile, I better not say fit, and you know, did what we asked and kept out the way. And so yeah, there were no problems. But it would seem from my inspection last week, the MCA are going to be on us more and more on the safety side. So I think it bears revisiting, really.
Yeah, which I think it's in hand. Yeah. Okay. Would you like to carry on with your report, Tom?
Chairman. The second part of this is from page 5 here, and the appendix. I'm not going to go into the appendix, but it was interesting from my point of view because I haven't. This is only my first year looking at the budgets. So in the appendix, really, it's a more detailed look at where our money goes, and obviously, in the last financial year, we've had to spend a disproportionate amount on the outboard repairs, and I note in this report that won't happen again because obviously there was a lot of money we had to spend to make sure that the boat was seaworthy last season and to make sure that we could sell it in a seaworthy state. And I also note the legal costs, and I think, and I've mentioned this before, we do run a disproportionate risk, and in the award of the legal costs, we covered barely, in fact, just we were about £1,000 short on the total fees that we had to pay to solicitors, barristers, etc., and legal expert advisors. So, you know, in the end, out of all of that, we ended up being about £2,000 down from our own budgets.
Just while you're on that note, Tom, I think it's worth mentioning we did cover this slightly at the association meeting, didn't we? About cost enforcement being a very small IFCA. And were we not going back to the association for more advice on that?
I've certainly raised it, and I continue to raise it with the, and I reminding me now that you were absolutely right.
There was
and I think from my own personal respect, I just have to keep on at this through Stephen. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it enables us to operate effectively. Although we're a small IFCA, we still have those pressures that we need to deal with. So I think it needs to be resolved. I hope it gets resolved in the budget review that will take place over the next year.
That's what I was.
But I think we need to be proactive and not wait until somebody decides that this is going to be the solution for the Isles of Scilly. We need to try and make sure that we get a budget which fits our needs.
Yeah.
Sorry. So a quick one on that, Chairman, where it says legal costs, total costs awarded by the court should read 15,000, not 16.
Right.
So that is an amendment to
15, not 16. We'll get that amended now.
So the reality is we've had a hit on our reserves. On page 5, you see a table which provides the worst case and the best case. So the reason why it's a worst case at the moment is because what gets absorbed and what happens with those costs from, so basically the costs from 2017, 2018 have come into our budget for last year. Whether they get absorbed in other council spend or whether we have to take a hit on our reserves is a decision that is taken above my head and will happen at the end of this financial year. So
I mean, just while you're on that as well, it's in the MACA, as far as I'm aware, that if there is a shortfall, the authority is liable to pick it up. And the chairman demands from full council that sum. And that is where we are. And that's backed by ministers in London as well. So it's nothing to worry about, but it's something hopefully is being resolved. And I don't see it being a large amount, do you?
So if you look at the table here, you can see that there's 23,738 has come to us from bits and pieces from the previous financial year. That's quite a lot of money for our reserves, which were 74,000. In the best case, what I'm saying is if that gets absorbed, then the commitment to our reserves is only the cost of the new boat, which I've put in here at 19,750. So there are, and I think that the important thing about having reserves is it's your rainy day fund, isn't it? And the rainy day, these are the kind of bits of money that I use as a small match against a much larger EMFF grant. So it allows us to get, for example, £50,000 worth of survey for £5,000. And that's what that money, I think, should be used for. So I presented it here. It's a kind of, that's for information only, essentially, but I think needs to be kept under review.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, that's all.
Is there any questions on that financial issue that as Tom's just spoken about? Steve?
Well, just a point, Chairman. I well remember salting away between 10 and 14,000 a year, which was put into reserves for the replacement vessel. And I assume that may happen again in the future for the replacement vessel of the new vessel.
Do you know, I'm unbelievably grateful that you did salt away that money, Steve, because without it, we would be in difficulties. And I think, assuming that our budget increases, and I have a figure in my mind, that we know, I want to go from roughly, our budget at the moment, that's 126,000, and I'm looking in my mind at another additional £60,000, I think, to operate, 60 to 70,000 pounds to operate. So when that happens, of course, we would then revert to making sure we salt away, you know, so it would probably take 7 years, wouldn't it, to salt away that money, by which time you have enough to get the replacement for the replacement. Yeah?
Yeah, yeah. I'd just personally like to thank you from the chair, as being in post for nearly a year, getting your head around the budget, and my personal opinion is you're dealing with it very well.
Thank you.
And I'd like that on the record.
Thank you very much.
And Ricky's input as well, I'm sure, will help. So, Tim.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, Tom, that considering you've been here for a year, getting your head around not just the budget, but everything else, and the difficulties of operating in a small community and sorting out everyone's problems, it's been really great.
Yes. Thank you very much. Have we got any other questions for Tom? No? So, right, we'll move on to agenda item 10. Kate? Kate there?
Yep.
I'm not going to ask you to read your report out, Kate. I'm going to ask members to take it as read, and if they've got any questions, come to you. Are you okay with that?
Good idea.
Thank you. So, hopefully you've all read Kate's report, and are there any questions? Tim, I know Tim's got one. Hopefully you can hear it.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, Kate. Obviously, a little bit concerned at where we're going with this life recreational remedies here, because just reiterating, like I usually do, that we've done, and I'm not saying that it's the definitive answer for everything, but we've done an awful lot here, and you know, sometimes these things, when a new project comes up, gets forgotten. That, you know, we've already got all the boatmen to do the WISE scheme. We've got code of conducts for diving, snorkeling, small boats, big boats. We've got anchoring limitage of size of boats that was agreed in the MCZs. And the question asked is, does this all work? And from where I sit going out on the water day after day, the answer is generally yes. It does work. And you also get, with that approach, a lot of goodwill. For example, in our own industry, the dive operators make sure that any groups of divers that turn up here do have a a list of the code of conduct for divers, and anyone that's seen out doing things they shouldn't do, we tend to sort of make sure we've got one of the forms out there that says what should be done and what shouldn't. So it does tend to work. So it's sort of like, you know, this sort of like smacks of a bit more big stick. So perhaps you could comment on that.
Yeah, so I think I lost the very end of it, but so the Life Remedies project is, as it says there, it's something that Natural England is the lead partner on, but it is a very big bid, and we're coordinating between other partners, including the Marine Conservation Society, the RYA, and the National Marine Aquarium, as well as Plymouth City Council, because some of the work's in Plymouth. So the work would be across sites like Plymouth, the Fallon Helford, the Solent, Essex Estuaries, and Isles of Scilly. And Isles of Scilly has been included because obviously it's really important for England's seagrass resource. We've got the best seagrass beds around. And we have some evidence of declines, and, you know, we want to investigate what's going on. So the way I see it is that this is a big funding bid across several sites that's going in. We don't know yet if it's going to be successful, but we should find out within the next few months. And it looks to me like an opportunity for being able to draw down some resources for Isles of Scilly to do something that's locally appropriate. So absolutely recognise all the work that's gone on to date to do with sort of recreational activities and you know, the sort of partnerships that have been built up already. And so it's not, absolutely not, to come in and sort of just throw a new project in, you know, ship people over to do something without any reference to that. I think the way I see it unfolding is that there'll be a programme of work set across these sites from the project if it gets funding. There'll be a project manager, there'll be staff employed, but also my time is included as part of that bid as Natural England's input to the Isles of Scilly site. So really it would be, the project would fund part of my time, so it'd be a day a week to start looking at these issues and to try and sort of feed down anything useful that came out of the project that could be used locally. So for example, they're going to do something, if funded, they'll get a consultant to write a natural capital assessment of seagrass resources, and then from that produce some kind of you know, public sort of user-friendly material that explains the importance of seagrass and seagrass beds. And that's the kind of thing that I see we could take from the national project and just use locally as we see fit. You know, it could fit into other things that are already going on Scilly. So it's a process of translating the national project to fit the local situation. So I'm hoping it will bring benefits and not upset the status quo or take us backward in any way.
Okay, thank you. The only thing that does, and you know what I'm going to say because I've said it before, but the only thing that is of a little bit of a concern is that we've got strange forces here that do things to the environmental forces here that do things to the seagrass beds that don't really happen on the mainland so much. And it's a very easy for people coming in from the outside. It sort of ends up a hard sell to explain to them that you're just looking at it in the summer and they don't see what happens in the winter. So that's why I make a comment.
Okay with that. Steve, you had a question or not to Kate? No? Okay. I think all your questions have been answered, Kate. Was there anything you wanted to say to the committee before you go?
That was it. But, yeah, any other questions, feel free to follow up separately.
No problem. Thank you very much for your report and coming on the phone to be part of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate. I'll ring off now.
All right, okay. Bye then.
Cheerio. Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
so that moves us on to 11, the MMO update. I'm not going to discuss any of that as David's not here. If you have, any member has any questions for David regarding his report, if you come to me or Tom, and we will get the answers for you. I think that's suffice with that. Okay, so thank you all for attending, and I'll close the meeting at 1:30.